My name's Louis Graham. I'm from a company in the United States called GeoQ. We started reselling the YellowScan systems last year after a lot of evaluation of who had the best systems, and by best I mean total life cycle analysis, not just price, but what's the reliability, what's the accuracy, and that sort of thing. And so we're very pleased with our relationship with them. I have no idea why they asked me to come here and do this keynote speech, and they did not tell me what to talk about, so maybe we can have a little bit of fun. So I was thinking about laser systems, and you know about Geiger mode LiDARs. You know, but some of you probably heard of Geiger mode LiDARs, and Geiger mode LiDARs work all the way down at the quantum level. Well, all lasers work at the quantum level, but Geiger mode LiDARs detect individual photons because we think that light is particles, right? So we have these individual particles, and we can detect these individual particles. Well, this guy in the 1920s, his name was Edwin Land. He started a company called Polaroid, his college dropout. And the first thing he did was he made these things called 8-sheet polarizers. So you're all familiar with them. They're in sunglasses. And they've got little slits that let light, if light were a wave, then they would go through in one direction, but it couldn't go in the other direction. Because if the electrons or the waves or the light is going like this, it can go through the slits. But if it's going this way, it can't go through the slits. So we do an experiment here with this little laser. Maybe. And see, here we have this laser, and I put Mr. Land's polarizer in front of it, and I rotate it. The laser goes away. How could it be a particle? No, we don't know the answer to that. I just leave that with you. It's just fun. So I thought that since I was able to talk about anything at all that I want to talk about, I would talk about the adoption of technology. Of course, you might say that if you knew so much about the adoption of technology, you would be riding around on your yacht in the Mediterranean right now instead of doing this talk, and there is some truth to that. So let's talk about the adoption of technology. You know, a lot of times with new technology, we think that all we do is go ask people, you know, what it is that they need, and they'll tell us, and we'll go make it, and we'll get rich. But in most cases, when everything shakes out, let me find my little laser pointer here. Form follows function, right? So we need something that's functional, and then we can worry about the form of that something. So there's obvious ones, but nobody ever invents them for us, right? So we need the fountain of youth. We need the teleporter. This is really, this is the phaser or stun gun. We all need this for our children. They misbehave. We give them 10 minutes of stun, and if they're really bad, 30 minutes. It would be very handy. Flying cars. Of course, in recent times, we need 3D printers to make food, not plastic. And this is the only one that really has some promise that we're starting to see, which is wireless distribution of power, right? So we know we need all these things. Why doesn't somebody go invent them? But what about the things we didn't know we needed? So a good example is electricity. Nobody knew that they needed electricity because they didn't even know what electricity was. And then suddenly when electricity came along, maybe in the first 5 years it was a want and not a need, but it rapidly became a need and became ubiquitous. Other things were kind of laughed at, like the cellular telephone invented by Motorola was designed for salespeople because they were the only ones that would talk constantly on a phone. Nobody else needed to talk that much on a phone. Boy, were they wrong. Netscape Navigator changed the world, right? It brought communications to the world, but nobody ever thought about it ahead of time. We're using bulletin boards and that sort of thing. And then really a real surprise is the Amazon ecosystem. Everybody's doing voice. It's been around for a long time. There was something called Dragon Speaks from IBM, I don't know how many years ago, that was not successful. And then here comes this device that's a speaker. We're not really sure what we use it for. And Amazon makes this thing, and they think this is pretty cool. We can kind of invade people's households with this device, but we're not sure it'll really be popular. And it was a runaway success. Amazon themselves had no idea. So the point here is that a lot of times the biggest successes, we don't really know what they are. Some of the runaway successes, things that came to market and just exploded, just took off. What are some examples of that? Well, Amazon with their Echo gets there again. You know, it's ubiquitous. It's been extremely successful. And then odd things like the vacuum cleaner, one of the most successful devices ever brought to market. You know, this was around the late 1800s, I think. You know, you had to have electricity first. That was an enabling technology, or the platform, if you will. And then we had Google. That came out of nowhere. Craigslist, you know, this is really the thing that destroyed the newspaper. We think it was the internet, but it was really Craigslist, because they made their money on classified advertising. And here it was suddenly free. It was ubiquitous. And of course, the iPhone. And then one we didn't really imagine that has been just incredible was the United States GPS system, you know, followed on now by Galileo, Beidou, and other systems. And I like to put airborne laser up here because I need to at least make the talk relevant, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about airborne laser a little bit later on. And what about what I call slow burns, things that were successful, but it took them a while to be successful? And I did a little bit of looking at, you know, what was the adoption rate of these different technologies and why were they slower? You know, they became very popular, but it was a very slow burn. It took a long time. And if we look at these different things, you know, I was surprised by the telephone. You know, as much as we like to talk, it really was a long adoption period. It never became fully adopted because it was displaced by mobile telephones. The adoption rate of the telephone only hit about 85%. Now it's back down again for the wired telephone. Remote power meters, you'd think this would be an obvious thing, that it would be adopted overnight, but it turned out that there were a lot of people that were running around reading meters, and they belonged to unions, and it was an impediment to the adoption of the technology, an impediment that was probably not anticipated. That's an important thing to think about when you're thinking about airborne LiDAR as well, and drone-based LiDAR. We'll talk about that again in a minute as well. And then the washing machine. So this is, by 1970, the washing machine still had a penetration of only about 65%. That's pretty amazing. But my wife Nancy pointed out that there was an alternative, and it was the laundromat, and that makes sense. So we need to think about that too. Is there a service offering that is competing with the technology that we're promoting? And then here's one that's closer to home, which is tripod laser scanners. And I was involved in the periphery of tripod laser scanners from the very beginning, because I happened to be working at a company called Intergraph when the guy that developed tripod laser scanners came to visit us, and he was trying to sell his company. And we looked at that technology and we said, well, that's really cool, but there isn't any software yet, so we're probably not interested. I think Leica Geosystems had a little more insight. And digital cameras were another thing that really had slow adoption rates. And of course, with digital cameras, it was because it was a replacement technology to film cameras. Of course, it's also interesting to look at the failures. So some big company failures. Almost everybody remembers New Coke. I guess that failure was just as spectacular in Europe as it was in the United States. Why they thought they needed to come out with it, I don't know, but it was a colossal failure. Other things like Quicken Financial Planner was this idea that a company had that said every person wants to know where they stand financially. They'll really like this tool. Well, it turns out we don't want to know where we stand financially. If we're going to go buy something, we don't want to know we can't afford it, right? We don't want a reason not to buy it. And then, you know, some others that date way back, like the TI-99. This is going back to about 1980, which was the largest commercial failure up to its time. $1 billion lost by Texas Instruments on this idea that they brought to market. And then some more recent ones, like the drug company Theranos. That was probably fraud, so I'm not sure that one counts. But here's a couple of others. This was a big political mess for President Obama, which was a solar cell company. Wasn't his fault. It was really, they had a different technology, and silicon suddenly got really cheap. This was about a $900 million loss, or $1 billion. It's about $1 billion loss for the venture capitalists. But another one that's really interesting to me is this company Jawbone, which was doing headphones, and then headphones didn't work, so they decided they would do fitness stuff and so forth. And it's really interesting that this company, Jawbone, which shut down a couple of years ago, was the second largest venture capital failure in the world. $900 million just down the drain. And then some closer to home, so into the drone space, I think some of these we can recognize. I like this one, 3DR. We actually, when we first, our own company, when we first went into the drone business, we had a reseller agreement with 3DR. And they were doing some really good technology. Then they decided to go consumer with their technology, but they really didn't have the infrastructure to go consumer with their technology. So maybe it wasn't so smart. So I kind of like that ad for it. But I thought it was pretty remarkable because when they first started down this path, they got $100 million in venture capital. And I was thinking, man, I made lists what I could do with $100 million. Buy some lasers and some Atlantic systems, and wow. How do you burn through $100 million in 1 year? They did it in 12 months, and they had nothing to show for it. It's just remarkable. Then on a bigger scale, A3 out of Israel was a new camera that was going to revolutionize digital camera technology, and it really looked like they were gaining some traction, but they were foiled by physics. It was just too hard of a problem trying to fly small chips at 30,000 feet or 10,000 meters. And then most recently, Airware, which Airware was a company that it was never really clear what they were doing. They started out in hardware, and then they switched to software, and then they switched to something else. And in my company, I do that all the time, and I call it, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so let me do something else. But the technical term for it, or the VC term for it, is pivoting. So from now on, my company will pivot. It won't fail at something and change its mind. Here's some murky waters. So if we were going to look at the crystal ball and say who's going to survive or who might be a victim of their own success or a victim of the world or the technology or whatever, here's some that are a little bit, what's going to happen. Tesla, they don't know how to build cars, right? They got a big problem. What's going to happen there? Kespri, insisting on changing the way people buy drone technology. Will they be successful? I don't know. They want it to scale. We all want it to scale. Microsoft's Surface tablet. Why is Microsoft in hardware? They have really good internal reasons to do it. Can they be successful in the end? I don't know. And here's one that's in trouble for a different reason, which is the iPhone, which is one of the early successes, right? But now, what is the next? You have to have an encore. What's the next step? They have to have a next step. Their whole company relies on that one device, so they're in a very vulnerable position. There's a lot of good technology out there that's knocking on their door, and history tells us that every time there's a big success, there's another ramp up and another big success that follows it of similar technology that's a replacement technology. But interestingly enough, it's very seldom that it's the same company that makes the step. So that should be very interesting. And then really, in our own backyard is Quanergy, which makes, they're in the automotive LiDAR business, similar to Velodyne and 30 other companies or 40 other companies. And it's really interesting. I think about 6 months ago, there was a big write-up, a multi-page write-up in Forbes magazine about the company Quanergy, but it was not the kind of write-up that you want your company to get. Has anyone seen that write-up on Quanergy? Yeah, it talked about how much trouble they're in. It's like, do you want to be the CEO and wake up to see that the next day? So their problem is that they bet their company, so to speak, on a certain kind of technology, MEMS LiDAR technology, and it's more difficult than people initially imagined. So we don't know what'll happen there. There's this myth amongst people that do stuff that they have a real advantage if they're the first mover. If I'm the first one to come to market with a technology, I'm going to be the winner, and I got to run. I got to be there first. But the interesting thing is these are all very big success stories from Microsoft through Netflix, and not a single one is a first mover. They're all followers. Every one of these companies is a follower. Even the iPhone, right? I mean, probably 3/4 of us in here, or maybe all of us, had mobile phones before we ever had an iPhone. They were far from being the first mover in that technology. And the same goes across the board in just about any kind of technology that you can think of. So it's really interesting. Why do these first movers, why is it that the first movers have a difficult time? Well, the reason one of the main reasons is that the first movers are out here doing all of the research and development that it takes to bring a brand new product to market. It's really difficult to bring new products to market because they don't work, right? Your idea doesn't work, and then you do it again, and it doesn't work, it doesn't work. What's a classic example would be the light bulb. You know, there were, I don't know how many iterations of the light bulb that Edison made before one was successful, 100, 150. And what happens is the cash burn just keeps mounting and mounting and mounting because you can't do this stuff for free. People do want to get paid. It's probably only the visionary, you know, that's willing to eat soup. Everybody else wants to eat meat and potatoes. And so by the time that you are successful and you bring your product to market, other people buy your product and they disassemble it and they go, oh, it's pretty easy to build, I'll make one of those. And so these second movers come in, and they're the guys that reap the profit because they don't have nearly as much invested in the R&D that it took. The other thing is that a lot of times the second movers are really, quite often, they're true companies. You know, they know how to take things to market. They may not be the innovators that are going to do the invention, but they know how to scale. You know, they know how to build reliable product and how to scale it out. What about adoption rates? I thought this was pretty interesting. So what this is it's a plot that says the item was invented at time 0, and then the graph is when its penetration in the market. If you look at the percentages over here on the left, and you see some really interesting things here, like a really practical thing like electricity that we really need. So, you know, all of these things that require infrastructure, you see a long time before they really start to take off. Like electricity, for example, we have to put transmission lines in and wires and all that sort of thing. So it takes a while for that to ramp up, and then once the infrastructure is in place, then we have this adoption rate. But we really like to, you know, one of these days we're going to learn that entertainment's the most important thing in the world, right? Because look at the adoption rate of the television. So we had to slow burn because they had to get transmission stations in place, but once they were there, everyone had to have a television. They didn't need necessarily a telephone or an automobile, but we needed a television. It's just interesting. And the other thing interesting here is the adoption rate of technologies that have an entertainment factor connected with them are really accelerated. So I think there's a thought that technology gets adopted much more quickly today than it used to. And that's true because it's easier to hear about new technology. It's easier to get that technology. And in general, technology is less expensive. But also, we have a lot more entertainment technology. Here's another one that gets a little bit more detailed that talks about how long it took things to come to market. And I thought this was pretty interesting because you can see, again, the adoption rate of entertainment device, which is the radio, this line right here. And you notice how everything had a real problem in the 1930s, at the end of the 1920s and 1930s, because of the global Great Depression, the financial crisis across the world. But we still managed to find money to buy a radio. That's really fascinating. And here's a really recent one. This is the adoption rate of Nespresso and K-Cups for making coffee. And just look at this. I mean, this is an amazing adoption rate. From 2014 to 2015, it almost doubled. So this is a runaway market. Who would have ever guessed? You know, it's just one of those things that you look at it now and you go, oh yeah, it's obvious, but 15 years ago, we wouldn't think that we would pay $1 a cup for this kind of thing. It's fascinating. What are characteristics of sustainable business models? If a business model is going to be sustainable and it's a breakthrough kind of technology, we see a breakthrough change. So this would be like lasers, for example. And then there has to be a period of incremental change. So we have a breakthrough change like, well, maybe the iPhone is in here, and then we see incremental change. And certainly with a technology like iPhone, we've been in incremental change mode for maybe 10 years. And then that gets followed by another breakthrough change in the technology. It's a pattern that happens over and over again. And what about how does the financial picture look for the adoption of new technology. And this may be a little bit relevant to you. If you're a surveying firm and you're bringing airborne LiDAR, drone airborne LiDAR into the picture, what does it look like? Well, you know that you spend money at the front end as you're doing the launch of this thing. You're burning cash. You have no profit, so you're below the line. And as you move out into the growth phase, then it takes you a while to recover cash. You hope to get profitable in this period. Your sales accelerate, of course, they're driving the cash and profit of this adventure. And then eventually there's a shakeout period. You know, there's a lot of players in the marketplace here. It starts to consolidate, we hit maturity, and then we see sales plummeting. And the point where we see the maximum profit from these endeavors is right around the shakeout period. And this all makes sense, right? Because as we hit shakeout and maturity, we have a lot of price competition. The price that you can get for a job or a product or whatever it is begins to go down as these competitors are in the marketplace. And finally, we hit maturity in the technology. So what are some things right now that are in the emerging phase of technology? Was certainly drone technology. You know, it had the breakthrough change probably 10 years ago, and which was really fueled by micro devices. So it was micro gyros, small batteries, small motors. You know, there was a convergence of technology that made the overall small drones possible. And now we're kind of in the sustaining period of drone technology. So we really haven't seen, I don't think, a remarkable breakthrough in drone technology in 4 years maybe, but incremental change. And the big question now is, how does it scale? How do projects scale? There's so many companies out there whose future depends on scaling drone technology. What does it mean to scale drone technology? It means that I can grow my customer base faster, more quickly than I grow my expense base, right? So I have to have my profits going up more quickly than my expenses are going up. And so there's a lot of thought about, can we do these huge systems that are beyond line of sight? Can we do huge projects? Can we do 100 miles, 1,000 kilometers, whatever, of transmission lines? So it's a scaling issue. Very closely associated with this same technology we're talking about in scaling drones is the so-called cloud. You know, whether it's software as a service or infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, whatever you want to call it. You know, the cloud is everywhere. It includes everything, including the kitchen sink. So what's going to happen there? And many business models, take Kespri, Precision Hawk, I mean, you can name so many of these different endeavors are linking drones in the cloud. I know there's a way to make these things work together. I haven't figured it out yet, but there's got to be a way to make these things work together. Then we see some in our space on cloud technology. Pix4D, of course, Redbird, which is sadly a failure because they were acquired by Airware, and then Airware liquidated a few months ago. Even our own company is playing at the periphery of this with a product that we have, and even Intel got into this mix. Intel, I thought you guys made processors. So is the Intel Insight platform the mapping automation system the industry has been waiting on? I don't think so. Has anyone heard of it? So I don't think so. But a lot of times we just get confused. You know, there's so much stuff out there we get confused, and we call things cloud computing, whatever that is. You know, really, cloud computing is a piece of software like VMware running on a bunch of servers, and you have internet access to it. That's basically the cloud, right? I think Amazon uses Zen, an open source version of VMware. And quite often, when people say they want cloud computing, they don't really want, it may not be cloud computing they want. They want cheaper software is what they really want, right? They're saying, oh, I'd like to be able to access it over the internet, and maybe you bill me by the hour for that software instead of me having to go buy this software package, and if I don't like it, I can turn it off, and I don't have this sunk cost that I'm going to lose, and so forth. Well, you don't need cloud computing, you need a different licensing model, and sometimes those two get a bit confused. An interesting emerging thing is, I think, is hardware as a service. So hardware as a service right now has a projected compound annual growth rate of 25%, which is higher than software as a service. So this is an interesting development. And hardware as a service can mean many different things. It may mean everything such as you're renting a physical computer in your lab as opposed to buying it. So you're buying this hardware as a service on some kind of, usually it means you're renting in some manner or another. What about the crowd? This is really interesting too, and we haven't seen a lot of this in our, well, I should say not directly in the drone space, but certainly in the mapping space. So this is where we can enlist anonymous people, if you will, to do work for us, and maybe we pay them or maybe we don't pay them. The best model, of course, is if we don't have to pay anybody to do all the work for us. We really like that model. So Google has had various iterations of this where, we'll go put out a base map and you guys fix it for us. So we'll put out this map, you make it better. An application that's been around, I'm not sure how long this has been. This was an acquisition that Google did out of Israel called Waze. How many people use Waze? So a fair number. So the idea of Waze is you're driving down. Waze is this app that encourages texting and driving, right? So I don't know if it's the funeral business that's really behind this thing or what. But this is the idea that you're driving down the road, you see a wreck, and you say there's a wreck here because somebody was inputting data to Waze instead of watching where they were going. And some other good examples, Wikipedia, of course, and OpenStreetMap. Is a big project that's been pretty successful. Some of these are egalitarian. I just do it because I want to be a good person and all that sort of thing, like Wikipedia. Jimmy Wales, the guy that developed this thing, from, believe it or not, Huntsville, Alabama, where GeoQ is located, is where the founder of Wikipedia came from. But he's just doing it because, I don't know, he likes to do it. He's never made very much money at it, but Wikipedia, of course, has been phenomenally successful, is where people contribute, of course, Waze. And then other people do it as a marketing scheme. So, build your own burger. That's a great way to engage this anonymous crowd into, buying your stuff or becoming aware of your brand. And a similar thing has been done very successfully by Lego. So how can we do it in our own marketplace? How can we get the crowd to go do our surveying for us for free? We're working on it. The really interesting thing about it is when the crowdsourcing stuff first came out, people said this is not authoritative data. This stuff is terrible. How would it ever be validated in anything like that? But if you think about it, the old Oxford Dictionary, somebody probably got the word bullcrap, and so it was one person that got to define bullcrap. But in the open thing of Wikipedia, somebody puts down their opinion of what it is, and somebody else goes, no, that's not what it is at all, and they change it. And so we see this oscillating between truth and fiction, truth on one side, and fiction is the outliers, but the convergence is to truth. So every project like this, like Wikipedia, maps, you name it, it converges to truth. Isn't that fascinating and useful? And then finally, distributed platforms. So this is another idea that could hit our space. So distributed platforms are that I provide some kind of a platform and it distributes some kind of service around, and people pay for the service, and I get a cut of the service because I provided the platform, like Uber. I love the way Uber is called ride sharing. Uber is not ride sharing, it's a taxi company. But it works really nicely. And all they do is provide a platform and take a lot of flack. And there's all kinds of things when you go looking at them, like vacation places for your dog and So there's a lot of examples of this kind of technology coming to bear. And then in our own space, there's this idea about, the whole big problem with if you're a survey company and you service a local area, then drones are a perfect fit for you. They're another tool in your toolbox. They're very useful. They allow you to do more work better, quicker, more accurately, et cetera. But what if you're a big company and you want to get rich from drones? How do you do it? Well, you could make them like DJI. But the other thing is, how do I make this scale? And so there's a whole lot of companies that are out there saying, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make a platform like Uber, except instead of Uber drivers, it's going to be drone pilots. And these drone pilots will go do the work and all that sort of thing. And so we have all of these companies, and there's probably 100 or 200 of them. I just listed a couple of them that happened to pop up. But there's a fundamental difference, right? A lot of people know how to drive, and that's the prerequisite for being an Uber driver. But to do this kind of thing, where you're going to go out and do, say, survey grade mapping, where you have a requirement of 5 centimeter RMSE, not every drone operator fits that. So there's a little bit of a problem with that business model. All right, so finally, I do have to talk about LiDAR a little bit, since this is a LiDAR conference. But I thought you'd get saturated with LiDAR all 2 days, so that's why I thought I'd just enjoy this other discussion. But sticky technology, what makes technology sticky? That means that it's not a passing fad. It comes, it stays, people like it, they use it, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's intuitive, it's visually appealing, it makes you so excited you want to tell others. So those are things, kind of or business to consumer kind of attributes, right? Although it makes you so excited you want to tell others. All you guys want to tell everybody about YellowScan, right? That's good for YellowScan, it's good for you, it's good for the business. Clarity, this is the one I like. The value does not have to be explained. If you have to go make this argument all day long about, no, it is better. Oh, I don't think it's better. Yes, it is better. No, I don't think it's better. That's hard. That's really hard. That's a tough thing to do. And that's what we face today, I think, with drone mapping and drone LiDAR technology. Because, you face it, and we're talking about primarily drone use in mapping. It's primarily what LiDAR is used for, and it's what our own company does. It's not new. It's a replacement technology. Isn't that true? We used to do leveling with spirit vials and these really nice instruments. And then along came this stuff called GNSS. I hate them because this equipment was so nice, it was so precision. And then it got replaced with this electronic technology, and that transition was a little bit slow because you can never do this as good with this, right? And now we're at this phase where we're saying, well, we're going to augment this stuff, but we're going to replace this guy running around poking the ground with drones that are shooting down with LiDAR. So it is a replacement technology. And so I look at photogrammetry today from drones. So here's photogrammetry of a log pile at a paper mill. And then I look at this with the YellowScan VX15, and that's beautiful. Look at that. I mean, look at the comparison between those two. And you can go out and you can show that to your potential client, and you can say, yes, it's better, but you have to quantify it, right? Okay, it looks better, but is it metrically better? And these sorts of things. I can look at other arguments. So here's a site that we surveyed that's supposedly a mine site, but obviously it's in retirement or it's in reserve because it's overgrown with vegetation, and it was flown with photogrammetry. And here you probably can't see it, but here's the surface that you get from photogrammetry, and here are a couple of red dots, poor choice of colors by me. A couple of red dots that show where the true surface is as we collected with RTK GNSS. Another reason why you need LiDAR rather than photogrammetry. This is an argument for your customer. And then I always like it when I read these articles that people say they're doing photogrammetry to go get transmission lines or distribution lines, et cetera. So here's photogrammetry of some transmission lines. So it should be showing up. There's a transformer on a power pole. I can get that, but there's nothing in here. And then here's the LiDAR. Now that wire actually terminates at that transformer. It's not missing. So here's the wires collected with a YellowScan surveyor. So clearly, so these are clear arguments that say, I need a different kind of technology if this is the kind of product that my customer needs. And then just vegetation in general. So here's, again, photogrammetry of a tree-lined area. So there's a profile cut through a tree-lined area. I have photogrammetry. It's nice and soft, and it gives me an idea of canopy. And then I look at this same thing with a YellowScan VX15 LiDAR with multiple returns. That's colored by return. It's beautiful. This is beautiful data. What is it that I need to do? I need to find the ground. Okay, I've got ground here. I need canopy by altitude. I can get canopy by altitude. I can't do that here, you know. So there's so much information available in the LiDAR data that I don't have in photogrammetry data. So you do have these strong arguments that you need to go and take forth. And then, of course, there's the idea of, you know, how do you compete in things that actually will compete with one another? We run into this ourselves all the time. So this is where kind of technology choice, where I have how much do you want surveyed and what is the cost of survey? And I don't know, you know, I'd be really careful about this chart. I made it up. You got to make up your own chart because I don't know your costs. And it says, hey, if I'm going to do a really small area and I have an RTK and I'm just going to send, you know, Bubba out there with the RTK rover and he's going to go collect some data. If it's a small project, maybe that is the most economic way for my customer. And here's drone LiDAR. And you know, the thing with drone LiDAR is that drone LiDAR is not inexpensive. You know, you may have a couple €100,000 invested in capital equipment, and you need to amortize that across a certain number of jobs, has finite lifetime, and so we have that amortization cost built in. What is it? I don't know. It's individual for you, but there's a crossover point where the drone LiDAR becomes more practical, more economical, et cetera, than the GNSS survey. And then eventually it all peters out, right? And you got to go to traditional manned aircraft LiDAR. Just because you own a drone LiDAR doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for every job. We had a customer a couple of weeks ago that wanted, I think it was 5,000 hectares done with a drone LiDAR. It's like, you know, you wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense. Well, I wouldn't do it. Maybe you would. So there is a sweet spot for that. Okay, now some stuff totally different. We'll change channels just for a couple of minutes and talk really quickly about deep learning, because we hear about deep learning all the time. If we make software, we're all in a panic now if we don't have a deep learning research group, et cetera. So this is the idea. Most deep learning just means a neural network with more than 2 layers. So I finally figured that out recently. So it's a neural network with more than 2 layers, and you give it some training data, and then you tell it if it's right or wrong, and you program weights on these so-called neurons. And you think about how successful that can be. Well, if you give it training data, this is like an interpolation problem where you say, I need to know what's happening. The red dots you could think of that as being your training data, and the space in between is where you don't have training data, and you can be pretty close to correct when you give it that kind of data. But if you try to go outside the training set, now you're doing what's called extrapolation, and you don't know where things go. So extrapolation, the classic case of that is, what is the price of a particular stock going to be tomorrow, right? That's extrapolating. Good luck with that one. So what is this? I don't know. It's a Pacman, right? I'm not sure what this is. But what is this? Oh, this is thinking about interpolation versus extrapolation. If I look at this, I'm trying to extrapolate. Where's this going? And now I bring in another figure. And then I bring in another. Oh, and now it's clear. It's quite clear this is a triangle, right? I know what this is. Is there a triangle there? Well, it looks like there is, but there isn't. There's nothing in between here. It's just the white background. If I flip it, wow, this is even more, and there's nothing there. It's just the edges that I'm looking at. And I can go through, you know, I can use colors and I don't lose it. I can change the outlines of what I'm using to do work, and it's quite clear that I'm working with a triangle. I can fade it, and I can still pick up a line over here, but I'm starting to lose this sense of triangle. Here I'm not really sure. It looks like it might be a rectangle, but the open area, now I'm really losing it. I'm not really sure what's going on here. And you can see this is this switching back and forth between interpolation and extrapolation. I had a little bit of trouble with my thing. And again, another Pacman. I'm not sure what this is, but now I know very clearly this is a bar of some sort. I can stretch it, I don't lose it. I can flip it, I still don't lose it. I can reverse colors. That even seems to enhance it. So our brain is playing trickery on us. And the amazing thing, and this is the reason why it's so hard to do the automation of digitizing road networks, one of the holy grails of feature collection, is because an operator could very easily digitize 2 straight lines here, and yet there's no line there at all. How does that happen? It happens in our brains. We're not really sure how it happens, but we're pretty sure it doesn't happen with a neural network. Isn't that interesting? Even though we think that's the model of our brain. So what's a machine to do? It gets a bad rap. So this is just an idea of there's a certain class of problems for machine learning. It's incredibly important. We're doing more and more of it. But machine learning that requires training data sets have to be encompassed or surrounded by the domain, within which they live. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this completely random discussion of technology and learning. Thank you.